who she is as a person. And then Nancy Pearley will kind of say something like, oh, Chloe's acting white now. Ugh. Yeah, but she definitely kept her African heritage very close to her, because she kept her medicine bag and she was throwing her conjure bones, but she also had like this kind of overlay of a, you know, good Puritan housewife kind of person. And so that's when Nancy Pearley refers to her as acting white, is she's kind of trying to figure out who Chloe is, and Chloe is both of those people. She is that mystic person who has kept her African religion and culture, as well as she's embraced the Puritan culture as well. It's an interesting mix, and I love her. Now with Chloe, there's some sadness there. First of all, you know, she's taken from her family and taken so far away that she'll never see them or have any contact with them. And she actually comes out of it better than some people who had that experience. She actually lands in a family where she's cared about and looked after and becomes part of the family. So she's actually a little better off than a lot of people are in that situation. But there is one thing, and I keep coming back to this, she could never marry. Because the only black person in this area was this slave named Limbo who lived in Freiburg. And she couldn't marry him because he couldn't read and write, and she just would not marry somebody who was ignorant. So he was her one choice. And I bring that into the book here and there because here she is caring for the Pearly children as they're born, and she'll never have her own. And so part of what she talks about in her songs is, I have not my own. So it's kind of an interesting and sad thing. Yes, sir?
You said that Chloe threw her bones on the floor for answers. Why did she do that?
Yeah, it's an African tradition, and also some other cultures where it's like, have you heard about people doing fortune telling? It's like that. So if the bones fall a certain way, it means it's one answer, and if they fall a different way, it means it's a different answer. And they're interpreting that, whether it's, you know, who knows. I don't want to say it's not real, but because I don't want somebody to put a hex on me. But it's similar to, have you ever seen anybody use a Ouija board? Where they put their hands on it and they're like, ask it a question, and it says, you know, do you like Sally Jane? Yes. Oh, you like Sally Jane. So it's that same kind of thing. It's that trying to cross over into the spirit world in a way. So when she wanted an answer to something, she would go up there and she would throw the conjure bones. And usually they were like chicken bones or something like that, depending on where you lived. But I think hers were chicken bones, because I think they mentioned that in the book. So it's a way of trying to get an answer when you're confused about something. Some people would say a prayer. She threw her conjure bones and then probably said a prayer too. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Did you say how many children the Pearleys had?
The Pearleys had 5 children. The oldest 2, the boys, John and Thomas. John inherited the family homestead, and then Thomas, as the second son, was given some land in Naples. So if you know where the Pearly Road is off of 302, that's where Thomas's house is, and it's still there. It's a gorgeous house. And then the daughters, as they called themselves, the disinherited, because they would never inherit any land, because, you know, they're women. So they got household goods when they got married. So that was their dowry, was that they got, you know, a bedstead, and they got Rebecca Pearly, the oldest daughter, tells a story of being given a cartload of turnips, and she sort of looks upon that as part of her inheritance. And she tells a story of, she's coming from, if you're familiar with South Bridgeton, Route 107 going out to the Geiger's orchard, as you're coming back from that, it's mostly downhill. You know, I used to ride my bike and it was uphill both ways back then. But those days, it was downhill. So she's coming down the hill near Adams Pond, and she's having a problem with her wagon. There's a board loose. So the board bumps up, and the turnips, she's leaving a trail of turnips all the way down the road. And she had to go back and pick up as many as she could because, you know, it's her inheritance. You know, just drop your turnips all over the road. So Rebecca Purley married Ebenezer Fessenden, and they lived in Freiburg. Now, Freiburg at that point was the up-and-coming town, and Enoch Purley was rather upset about that because his daughters were deserting him, and he wanted them close by. He was a very, very much a family man, and from his letters and the stories told about him, he wanted his family close by. He was very much a good father, a caring father, but he liked to tell these stories about how, you know, when they first came up here, he had to sleep with his gun next to his bed because of the wildlife, and, you know, they didn't have a pot, and they had to go uphill both ways, and, you know, the snow was up to here. He used to tell those same kinds of stories to his kids. And they were like, oh gosh, here goes Dad again. So Rebecca married Ebenezer Fessenden, and they lived in Freiburg. And then the next daughter, Rebecca, ended up marrying also a Freiburg man and moving to Freiburg. She married a doctor named Rule Barrows. And then their daughter Huldah, well, the bones fell the wrong way. And yeah, Huldah didn't make it. So anyway, and I wanted to touch on a couple of the things, a couple of the areas. Yes, sir?
Did you figure out approximately which country in West Africa?
I did. I actually came down to a tribe.
Wow.
Which
And
one?
it's the Kissee tribe. It's Kissee.
And they're where?
They're in, there's like this little tiny area. And I'm trying to remember which country it's in now, and it's not coming to. It's not coming to me which country it is, but it's not on the coast. It's inland somewhat.
Mala?
I don't remember. I probably knew at the time I looked it up. I probably knew what it was then.
Was the turban a Muslim artifact?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but it could be. Could be. If you look up the Kissee tribe, you can pinpoint where it is. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
K-I-S-S.
Kissee. Yeah,
Kenya.
and it's
Kenya, she used that.
Kenya.
Oh, way over there.
It's in Kenya,
Oh.
but it's kind of on the western side of that. So there's like a little area that's kind of in the middle of where that tribe is. It kind of straddles an area.
Amazing she came. Well, that's East Africa.
You got to go this way. Go this way. Because the tribe came from a very, very specific place, and it was on the western side of,
Yeah.
but not all the way to the coast.
Was she Bantu?
I don't know. I think she was. That's my thought. And I actually started looking up people from that area and what they looked like so I could get an idea. Like, I don't know. She's just fascinating to me. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what life was like outside of that little cabin. So I'll start with church, because church was very much a part of how people lived and how they did things. So one of the things that the early settlers had to do was they had to hire a minister, and they had to have a place for the minister to preach, and they had to support the minister. So the first settled minister in Bridgeton was Nathan Church. And if any of you watched or saw the Rufus Porter house moving, November of, when was that? 2016, when the house was moved from up on North High Street down to next to the Bridgeton Library. There's a great video of it, by the way. It was done by Mike Corthell. So anyway, that house is Nathan Church's house. So it's a very special house. It has Rufus Porter / Jonathan Poor murals in it. But my interest is from the people side of it for the purposes of today, because he was an important person in the community. But this is what Sunday was like for the forebears. They'd get up very early, and Enoch Purley and his family traveling in from South Bridgeton, they'd come by wagon or horseback or both. So they'd get here for the morning service. The morning service would go on forever. You know, the pastor's sermon would be like 8 tiny handwritten pages, and the handwriting was tiny, the pages were not. So he would go on and on and on and on and on, and then they would break for lunch, and then they'd come back and he would preach another whole sermon. So he was a hardworking guy. To come up with 2 complete sermons every single Sunday is a lot of work. So it would last for a very long time. Now in the meantime, they got to get back because they got to do what? They got to milk the cows, feed the chickens, walk uphill both ways. It's a whole thing. But church was very much a part of their lives and very much a part of the structure of society. There were rules, and you followed them. And one of those rules was, you will be in church, or you better have a good reason. So church was very much a part of their lives, but it was also not just the religious part of it, it was the social part of it. Because remember, you know, they're all in their little cabins, and they only ever see each other most of the week. So you got to get out a little bit. That's why we're doing this series here. This is the We All Need to Get Out of the House Now and Then series. You start shooting holes in the door and things like that. It's not good. So it was very much a social thing. It was a chance for the young people to get together and start picking out their spouses. They might not have called it that, but that's basically what was going on. You know, that's where you went to meet people. You didn't meet them on the internet. You know, you didn't run into them. You know, it was always going to be at church or school that you met them. It was always somebody in the neighborhood. Now, the government side of things, let me see if this sounds familiar to any of you who follow town government. Once a year, they'd have a town meeting, and they'd all get together and they'd stand up and they'd, you know, well, I think we ought to be doing this. And then they would vote on stuff and they'd pay the town bills, and then that was pretty much the same as it is now. Nothing has changed on that front. I mean, the building is a little nicer and bigger, but other than that, pretty much the same. Libraries came along pretty early. A lot of churches had their own library. So the congregational churches in Bridgeton started their own libraries because it was very important to them that everybody was educated. They had an extremely low rate of illiteracy, people that couldn't read. Extremely low. Like almost everybody could read and write. That's phenomenal. We don't have that now, but we should. I recommend it. So education was very, very important. One of the things that Freiburg had that Bridgeton didn't have was they had an academy. So their young people could go there and get educated. So Bridgeton, part of what I'm writing about right now in the 4th book of the series is the founding of Bridgeton Academy, because the way that it worked, 3 sections of the town went out and they were like, we got to get the academy here. We want the academy here. So they went out and they were collecting money. So they were getting pledges and subscriptions. That, you know, if the academy is built here in South Bridgeton, then we're all going to give this money. If it's built here in the center of Bridgeton, we'll give this money. Well, guess who won? North Bridgeton won. So it actually came down to a point where they each raised the same amount of money, about pretty close. They each raised about $4,000 to $5,000, and so it came down to location, location, location. And the independent trustee people that came in and looked around, they were like, okay, so we got this really great lake right here, so that's how it ended up there. So they were very much looking at what do we do next, what do we do next, what do we do next. So we had libraries, we had schools, we had churches. Schools were usually what you would think of now as like the one-room schoolhouse. That's generally what was happening. But the school system progressed very quickly because families had tons of kids. So there was one family, like there were 17, I think it was the Ingalls family. I think they had like 17 children named Ingalls in the one-room schoolhouse. So as the schools grew, more settlers came in, people had more children, then they would add another school district, and then they add another school district, and then eventually what did they do? They brought them all together. And I'm not sure the education got better. It's just an opinion. So all of the facets of life, the social stuff, the church, the schools, the libraries, all of those things were put in place a very long time ago. And they're still here and still thriving. So it's a pretty fantastic thing to be able to sort of tie back to that and to understand that those people who came up here to the wilderness and they worked so hard to get all this stuff in place, it's still here. So their lasting legacy is just that. They built a town, and we all get to live within the framework of that and enjoy their labors while we do our own labors that will lead to whatever we're doing for the next generation. So, yes, sir.
You might want to mention that back in the early time that Bridgeton extended over here to East
Yes.
Falls Road. So this was all part of Bridgeton. at
Yes,
that time.
thank you. So part of what was going on with the surveying is because of the way the surveyors did the original survey, they ended up with all this land on kind of this side of the lake that they hadn't actually originally intended. So this didn't get surveyed right away. They worked on assigning the lots and selling the land on the other side. And then this eventually did get surveyed, and it was actually Benjamin Kimball Jr. who did the surveying over here. And then that broke off to Harrison, and then you've got the Otisfield side of things, and then part of Bridgeton broke off to be Naples, which is how Thomas Purley ended up in Naples rather than in Bridgeton, even though you can almost see their houses from the hill up there at Geiger's Farm. So there was a lot of boundary stuff that was going on, and it was they were constantly carving things off. So they carved off some from, there was something that was carved off another town that ended up as Bridgeton. There was a lot of that going on. So that's how Harrison came to be. It was kind of carved off from pieces of the Bridgeton grant, and I think another grant was part of that. I know Otisfield and Harrison are kind of side by each and part of the whole picture, but some of it was Bridgeton, yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Also might have mentioned that, why is Harrison called Harrison?
Harrison is called Harrison because of Mr. Otis. See?
Well, didn't he have a brother, Harrison?
So it was his, I think it was his son. So Mr. Otis's son, I think, was Harrison, and that's how we ended up with Harrison. But somebody might want to Google that. 'Cause
Harrison Otis.
Harrison Otis.
Yeah.
So was he the Otisfield guy, or was he the son of the Otisfield guy?
It's if you're members of the Harrison Historical Society, it's in their newsletter that I just got yesterday.
Oh, wow. So yeah, so Harrison and Otis,
I think it's the same person.
they might have been brothers. I don't know. I can't remember. But it's in the newsletter, so I'm going to go check that.
How big is Bridgeton today?
I just actually saw that this morning. It's like 37,000 square feet or something. I don't know. I can't remember the number, but it's bigger and smaller than it originally was, both.
The boundaries have all moved.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Who else of the young people here have a question? What do you want to know about? Would you like to know about bathroom things? Because, you know, they had outhouses.
Privies.
They had privies, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Where did Helga die?
Hulda died in 1819 of some sort of fever kind of thing. So she got very, very sick. And she was, here's some scandal for you, okay? So Hulda was actually engaged to Dr. Rule Barrows. But Hulda's sister Nancy kind of had a crush on him. So after Hulda died, Nancy married her boyfriend.
Wait a minute.
What do you think of that?
Not like you had a lot of options.
Like
wasting it for a good doctor.
Exactly, you know? Somebody's got to marry the doctor. So, but yes, when she was very sick, that's when Chloe went up here to her old room, and she threw the bones, and the bones fell the wrong way. And so she knew, oh, I just got goosebumps. Well, that was weird. So she knew that Huldah was going to die, and she was right. But that's an excellent point, actually. I wanted to talk about the health of the people back in the day. It wasn't good. So one of the things that happened, and there was actually a letter from Enoch Pearley, a couple letters from Enoch Pearley, where in the space of a month or 6 weeks, his family has, some of them have the measles, some of them have the chicken pox, and some of them have the cow pox. They didn't have mumps. I don't know how they escaped that, but I mean, they pretty much hit them all. But it was a very short period of time. Some of them got the measles, some didn't. Some got the cow pox, and some didn't. And I think they all got the chicken pox, or maybe, I can't remember. Anyway, they were sick a lot. So there were things like that were very contagious. And then there were things like typhoid and typhus fever. And then there was the dreaded consumption, which is, we call it tuberculosis now. So it's like a major lung dysfunction thing. And people would waste away for years. It was horrible. Yes, ma'am?
What's the cowpox?
It's related, see, I had to look this up on Google. So it's related to the chicken pox, but you actually caught it from cows. So like when you're milking the cow and the cow had sores, they were contagious, so you could catch the cow pox and it would kind of go up all your arms and big blistery kind of. Yeah.
And then they're renting the cow out.
And then they're renting the cow out, yeah. So the other thing that was an absolutely heartbreaking disease at that point in time was diphtheria. And the Peabody family, who was Enoch Pearley's sister Mary, married Lieutenant John Peabody, and they lived next door almost. They lost 4 of their children within 6 weeks of the diphtheria. And it was a dreaded, dreaded disease because it literally, it always, almost always was caught by children. And then it would just strangle them. And it was absolutely horrible. So you can imagine like coming down to the breakfast table and, you know, 4 of your kids are no longer there. Really heartbreaking stuff. So we're very lucky now that we have medicine that either prevents or cures some of these diseases. You know, tuberculosis was just terrible, and it's easily cured now, but we didn't have those antibiotics back then. So that was Nathan Church's family, the first minister I mentioned. 3 of his daughters died of consumption because there was no cure and they just wasted away, and it's a horrible way to die. I don't want to go into the details, but there's a lot of coughing. So there were doctors in the area, but you know, they were only as good as the information that they had at the time. So Dr. Farnsworth was our first doctor, and then his son was also a doctor, and then we had the Fessenden doctors, and so we had doctors, but there wasn't, you know, they could only do what they could do, and it wasn't much. They did weird things too, like bleeding people. Oh, you don't feel good? Here, let me take some blood from your arm. Really? I feel so much better now. All right, so who else has questions out there? Yes, ma'am.
When you were researching, did you run across anything about Stephen Gates, who accompanied Captain Kimball?
Yes. I don't know a lot about him, but I have come across him here and there. Is he a relative?
Well, it was very odd because I'm from Kentucky originally, so you would think I would have absolutely no connection to Maine. But when I was doing some of my genealogy, I discovered that my 4th great-grandfather's sister Anna married Stephen Gates' son Nathaniel when Nathaniel and a bunch of the brothers here from Pondicherry went to Ohio.
Yeah. And that was a really common thing. We had a really bad winter one year. You may have heard about it. It's called 1800 and Froze to Death, or the Year Without a Summer.
Right.
So 1819. I've been wanting to write about this like my whole life. I just think this is so fascinating. You know, it was snowing in the middle of the summer, like a lot of snow, not just like a little spit like we had today. It was a lot of snow, and the crops failed like crazy. There were major weather weird stuff going on, and so people got together, and sometimes whole towns left the state and they went out to Ohio or various places. And we saw the same thing, not we because I wasn't here, but I feel like I was, after the Civil War. Once our main men had gone out there and they had gotten, they saw fields that didn't have rocks.
Yeah,
No?
right.
Come on, that was like really big. You see all the stone walls that we have around here, it's because we got to get the rocks out of the way. It also helped to keep cattle in and that sort of thing. But, you know, we had to have a place to put the rocks because we had to get them out of the way so we could plow the land. So people were looking for opportunity. And opportunity was any place that you work, right? It's the same thing now. When I was graduating from high school, I had a lot of friends who were like, I'm out of here, I'm going to California, I'm going to Florida. It's going to be better wherever you're going to go. And that's, so they were looking for basically, you know, a better life, just like everybody who moves anywhere. So there was a lot of migration at that point, and some of my New Jersey people left New Jersey and went out to, I think it was Illinois, and there's a town out there called Jersey or something like that. So they went there, they kind of took what they had, and they did the same thing when they came here from England. Like they left England, they came here, and then they tried to create exactly what they had left behind in England. But it was better because it was here. But people do that all the time. You know, it's like, I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. When people come up here from New York, you know, to get away from it all, and then they're like, well, you know, you should do it this way. Like we do back in New York, you know. There are those people. So migration was amazing to me, and the amount that they traveled too was really interesting to me. And one of the things that they talk about in their letters is whether it was good sleighing or not. Because in the wintertime, if it was good sleighing, they could travel back to Boxford or Andover or wherever they were from to see their families and get some business done and that kind of thing. If it was bad sleighing, they were kind of trapped in their little cabin, nowhere to go. So one of the things that I find over and over again in studying history, whether it's local history or, you know, another country, wherever, is people are people. You know, people are the same wherever you go. There's always going to be troublemakers, and there's always going to be people that are doers and movers and shakers, and people who sit back and say, well, somebody ought to do something about. So people are people, and it's fun to study them, and to find those cranky people, you know, in the pages of history is always fun for me. And then to find the interesting people like my friend Chloe. I saw a hand somewhere.
I was just wondering how far or how long it would take them to get from Bridgeton to Freiburg if they were going. What would that commute look like?
Well, you know that nice 302 road that we have now that's been paved? They didn't have that.
Yeah.
So to make a trip like that, I mean, the roads were absolutely horrible. You were like, it might be like a little path through the woods, you know. So it took a while until they got to a point where they could actually get a carriage through, and then still you just look at any road in the spring here and imagine like 10 times worse than that because they didn't have like, you know, pavement over it. So every tree root, every, you know, stone in the way, boom, boom, boom. Exactly, yeah. By the time you get there, you're like, wow, my kidneys are shot now. So
in 1880,
Plus my axle.
yeah, 1880, even with a single horse and a buggy leaving North Bridgeton to get to Freiburg, it was an overnight, and people stayed at Walker Farm. You ever seen where Walker Farm is? That was often a place they took in boarders.
So that was 1880.
That was 1880.
Yeah. So if it was sleighing weather,
Yeah.
it was probably faster. So yeah, it was a significant amount of time. And the Diary of Phoebe Beach, she talks about going during the 1860s. She talks about going to Freiburg. She's going for at least a week. She's not just going to run over there to the Harvest Hills thrift shop and pick something up and come home. It's a great deal of effort to get over there, so they're going to stay there and they're going to visit all of their family while they're there. So it's
So were people in Bridgeton sending their kids to the academy in Freiburg, or they were pretty much founded pretty close to one another because?
they sent people. Some of them went to Gorham. So there was I think it was a Gorham seminary. Normal school, but there was also a seminary, as I recall, because I think one of the Pearly sons or grandsons went there, because there's a letter that he's written back about some anti-slavery stuff.
But they would board.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So you're going to get your kids, you're going to send them off to school, and it's going to be a while before you see them again. It'll be the end of the term.
And Rufus Porter went to Freiburg Academy.
Rufus Porter went to Freiburg Academy, as did a number of luminaries, like Joseph Fessenden, Joseph Fessenden is the first pastor of the South Bridgeton Church. He's kind of one of the lead characters in the second book in the series about abolition and Underground Railroad. So yeah, Freiburg was like the important school, which is why Bridgeton had to have one. Because you don't want you to send your kids all the way over there. You don't want to send them to Gorham. You don't want to send them to Portland. Some of the Pearly grandkids went to Portland. So it was very important that we have an academy here. And then it became, after that, it became important that not only we have an academy, but that we have a high school. Because a lot of people couldn't afford to go to the academy, to Bridgeton or Freiburg, because you had to pay. So Bridgeton High School came along, and I don't know if you know where the Bridgeton Historical Society is, the old fire station and the new fire station, kind of up on Methodist Hill. That's where the Bridgeton High School was, and they set it up there like on this hill. So from every viewpoint of the town, you're looking up at this high school. It's like this shining building sitting up there. It's like an aspirational thing that everybody wanted to go to high school. That was a big thing. Yeah. I know you guys are all excited about high school. There's young folks here. You can't wait to go. But they placed a great deal of value on education. And thank goodness, because they could all read and write. So I have something to talk about. Otherwise, it'd be all oral tradition. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. When you spelled Kissy, was
Yep.
it Kissi?
Actually, it may be. Yep.
It is I.
Because
yeah.
there's a double I, and those are the ones in Kenya.
Okay.
So Kissi is Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify that because I was giving bad
See, do we love librarians or what? Yes, ma'am.
In Rufus Porter Museum, isn't there a picture of one of the doctors and his family?
Okay, and we have a copy of probably the same picture at Narragansett. Okay, so that is Dr. Farnsworth's son and his family. And Dr. Farnsworth's son's wife is related to, oh no, they're related to the Pearlies. And I'm trying to remember what the young Dr. Farnsworth is a cousin to the Pearly children. I think that's the way it is, Enid Pearly's children. But there's like a double relationship there, because the wife is related and the husband's.
Rufus Porter was a Pearly.
And Rufus Porter.
Mother was a Pearly.
There's a whole. I spent a lot of time with Rufus Porter and his genealogy recently because I was doing a talk for senior college.